Yeah.
They're just not. I guess I was expecting something different,
Mhm.
and they felt very similar to the $12 pair I bought on Amazon this past summer.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know.
don't know because I've never used a flash drive on this thing before. Let's see.
Okay.
You were on mute. Try it again because you were on mute.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Please acknowledge. Say something. Make sure that I can hear you because I can't see faces. And for questions, I need to make sure that I hear you and you hear me. You can actually send me a message and I can at least see that.
I hear you.
Okay, and this is?
This is Chris. I'm downstairs in the floor time.
Hey, Chris. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Kaylee and Susie, I see you're on here. Susie, if you'll unmute yourself and say something so I know that you're there.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. I hope you are.
Yes, thanks.
All right, great. So we've got 3 people in Zoom, a couple of people in the classroom. We'll get started here momentarily. I cannot see your faces while I'm doing a screen share, so please.
I think that's why.
Can any of you guys undo show the video and see if you'll pop up on my screen? Because I'm gonna have to clear my little message board so I know who's here so I can see my slides.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Yeah, Susie, I'm not seeing you, so I appreciate you doing that. Okay.
Can't hear the arrow. Okay. Try the little arrow button. And the top down for the other one. I don't know.
Okay, so.
They're different on every machine.
Okay, so guys, in Zoom, just please bear with me. I know there's 3 of you out there. You're just gonna have to speak up to get my attention. Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, guys, good afternoon. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We're here to go over listing forms and other miscellaneous addendum. I am Terry Rogers. I'm your compliance officer. My role here is to support your broker in charge, Rob Pettit, and to give you that extra layer of risk management so that you have somebody to review all your documents when they're turned into command and make sure they're correct, they're signed, they're filled out properly, and So your questions for me, please feel free to call me. That's something you probably don't hear a whole lot these days. Go ahead and jot down my number. So if you have questions for me, again, please call me. Don't email or text me because they're not easily answered by email or text, especially when you type with just 2 fingers. It's 704-560-9630. 704-560-9630. And that is the best way for you to ask me questions. That way I can answer them immediately and you don't have to wait till we have a sit down meeting. That worked out well in a case just last week. Somebody wanted to meet with me and what's your question? And she called me and I answered in less than a minute. Oh, we still need to meet? No, you told me exactly what I needed to know. So it's productive for you and it's certainly productive for me. That said, I'm not your broker in charge unless Rob is on vacation, and then I am a broker in charge and would be the backup to Rob. So any of your real estate questions, always defer to Rob Pettit. If he's in town, he is the one that you should be going to with a real estate related question. And if he's out of town, then of course you would be directed to call me. Again, you're welcome to call me for those questions. Just be respectful. I mean, I do answer my phone at nights and on weekends. 10 o'clock at night might be a little bit too late, so there's usually no such thing as a real estate emergency that late. But if you need me, please reach out to me. I've been here with Keller Williams since 2013. I've been here for over 13 years, since 2007. So this is my entire career here, and you're with a great company. We have a lot of tools for success. Our technology is unbeatable. Your leadership team is outstanding. So I know that you'll do well here, and because we're all here to really help you grow your business and be better. So that said, let's get right into the listing forms part of the class. And again, feel free to chime in with your questions. This is a discussion class. First thing we're going to talk about actually are realtor forms. Realtor forms, or by the name itself, realtor, they are for realtors. Here's an old list of realtor forms from 2015. I'm not sure if you can see out there in Zoom. But they are broken down by number. They're numbered forms. And so these aren't forms you can give out to your friends or your neighbors. If they need your assistance, they need you. You don't need to be providing them with paperwork. So please make sure that they understand that you bring a lot to the table. But in general, the forms, you have 100 series forms, which are seller type forms. 200 series forms are buyer forms. The reason I'm going over this for you is to tell you what forms not to use. You don't use 500 or 400 series forms. 400 series forms are property management forms. To do property management, you need to be a licensed property manager. So some of these forms, for example, a listing agreement, please don't use Form 585 for professional services disclosure. When you're pulling forms from DocuSign, you see that name of the form and you assume that that might be the right one, but you need to make sure residential form for that service is Form 760 for the personal services disclosure, professional services disclosure. So 400 and 500 and even 600 series forms we would not use because those are auction forms. So I just wanted to throw that there at you to make sure that when you're pulling up forms on DocuSign that we're all on the same page. If it's a commercial form for a residential property, I would have to return your entire file. And obviously it's embarrassing if you go back to a client and say, I'm sorry, I need to get you to re-sign this document. I provided you the wrong one. So just keep that in mind. What we have as a guide for you is your command file checklist, as you see on your screen and in your handouts. Did you have handouts, sir? Okay, perfect. So that is a list of the most commonly required forms for a transaction. If it's a listing, if it's shown on here and applies to your listing, it is a required form. A septic permit, for example, is not required if it's on city water and sewer. However, what is required, we'll get to shortly, is a water, sewer, and septic disclosure form. We'll talk about that shortly. That is required for all listings and all buyers in North Carolina. And it is an office form, so that would apply to South Carolina contracts as well, because it's an in-house office form to protect you as the agent. If it's on here, as I said, it's required. However, there are some things like a septic permit that you have to request from the health department if the seller does not have that in their little portfolio of documents when they bought the property. So that's okay. You're required to turn in your files to your firm within 3 days of contract per the Real Estate Commission. That's anything that's signed by your buyer or seller needs to be turned into the firm within 3 business days, without exception. But what you don't have, you don't have. So I'm not going to return something back to you. I don't see a septic permit. It could take you a couple of weeks if they have to send it to you by mail. Every county is different. Some counties, they can provide them to you online. Some counties require you to send them a fax request. Some counties just may not have it. They may say, as if an older home, no records are available. So then you're going to upload a document and you're literally going to write on that septic sewer disclosure form that I mentioned, per Sue at Rowan County Health Department, there are no records available for this property. You're going to disclose that online on the MLS, and you have done your due diligence as an agent to disclose that, hey, I can't give you what I don't have. Otherwise, if there's a septic permit available, we do need to put that online and in your file. A pending sale, whether it's a buyer or a listing that just went under contract, that is another time when you would submit this for review. Remember, you have to hit that submit button in Command before I see it. I don't see it when you create an opportunity unless I'm going to look for it. And trust me, I'm not going to do that. I am a full-time agent just like you guys, so I wear a couple of different hats around here. So I'm only going to look at things that are submitted for my review that are titled properly. In other words, you do title your file COR dash the prefix is COR dash the property address. Now, Terry, just have a buyer and I created an opportunity. I don't have a property address. That's great. You've got a buyer, you created the opportunity. That's step one. I don't need to see that, okay, because you don't have a contract, right? So you can't put an address on there till you have a contract. But once they go under contract, you create a custom tag and you put the property address, and then you could supplement it by the last name of the buyer if you want to. Now, I don't care how long it is, as long as you start with COR, I can see that. The other important thing is, again, I would print this document out, even though everything is in the cloud. I actually put a check mark when I have all the documents that I need, and I put a note in here when I submit it for review so that I know that that is done. And there is not a space on here. We kind of ran out of room. CC requires us, once we have a contract for purchase, whether it be a listing or a buyer under contract, then we have a sales price. So we get paid on sales price. So we need to create our offer and our commissions tab. That needs to be completed in Command as soon as you turn it in for review for me. So I see your files and review your files. I do not review or see your offer and commissions tab. That goes straight to our MCA CC for a review, and that is how you get paid. So if that's how you get paid and you cannot get paid without that, again, it's very important that you remember to do so. So if I have this piece of paper in front of me, I can note when I did my commissions tab and I'm good. And trust me, after 13 years, the one time I didn't print out this piece of paper was the one time I forgot to do my own commissions tab, and it caused me a delay in getting paid. So I'm not perfect, but I'm just saying that this will save yourself from having a delay or a little bit of grief and wondering, okay, what did I turn in and when did I turn it in? Print this paper out and hang on to it on every transaction that you have. And finally, of course, you turn it in when you have a closing and you have a signed closing statement. In other words, don't turn it in the morning of closing. You have the final closing disclosure, but nobody signed it. It doesn't do me any good unless we can prove that it's been signed. So wait till the attorney sends it to you, then upload the closing disclosure and anything else you may have relevant to the closing. And then I can review that, and you're all approved and in full compliance so CC can pay you. Sound good? All right, I know I spent a lot of time on that one form, but I get so many questions on that, so I want to make sure that you guys understood it. The next form we have pertains to listings. It's a dock pier disclosure. So if you list any properties that have a dock or a pier, this is an office document. So being that it's an office document, it applies across the board, North or South Carolina. Okay, if it's a dock or pier on the property, we want to make sure that we fill this form out if it's not a permitted pier, is that going to be an issue during the contract process, or maybe even after closing if the buyers are told that, hey, you got to take this pier down because it wasn't permitted and they've already bought the property? Guess who they're going to be coming after. So this protects you guys. So that's only used, again, if there is a dock or a pier attached to the property. But this other document, we've actually reworded this and changed it slightly, but it's a water, sewer, or septic disclosure. That is, again, an in-house form that's found in Command under Office Documents, and it protects you by verifying as the agent that the property you're listed or the property that the buyer's under contract on, does it have city water, sewer? Is it connected to community sewer? Is it on a septic tank? So you obviously fill out the appropriate information. If it's on a septic tank, again, we need that septic permit. And it's pretty much self-explanatory. You sign it as a listing agent or the buyer's agent. And then the buyer definitely needs to sign it. Because again, you're disclosing to the buyer, you're on a sewer system that is controlled by the city or county, or you're on a septic system, which is exclusively your responsibility to maintain. There have been a lot of lawsuits and disputes over septic and sewer, and that's the reason this in-house form we came up with here recently. And again, we require it whether it's a North or South Carolina transaction. Questions in Zoom land?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Terry. I recently sent a document and I didn't title it with.
Hang on just a minute there. Okay, I have the volume down. Didn't realize it. Go ahead.
Okay, I was saying I recently submitted some documents, but I didn't put alias in front of it. Do I need to like redo the DocuSign envelope and send it to you again?
Well, not the DocuSign envelope. What we're talking about is strictly a command. The way you title your file in command, you use a custom tag format. It's under the edit button when you edit details about the buyer or the seller. So the DocuSign is different. DocuSign is how we electronically sign. But yes, if you don't use the COR prefix and your address, I'm not going to find your file and be able to review it.
Yeah, I did not use it, and I don't really. I'll need to get with Sue, I guess, or somebody to figure out where in command you're referring to make that tag.
Yeah, but please reach out to Sue or Rob. Since we're limited with 2 hours on this class and we haven't even got into the listing agreement, but just make a note that we do need to get the files. All of them need to be titled, just as you said, with using that COR prefix, or I won't be able to find them. We've got 2 other business centers that feed their documents into our same system. So that's why we have to distinguish which ones are for Cornelius. Good question. Thank you for that. Yes.
I had a really quick question.
Uh-huh.
On the utility provider portion of that document, it says recent utility bill. Do we get that from the other agent, or can we just call and get a copy?
That one, I am going to leave it up to agent discretion. We want to verify that if it's on City of Water, we want to verify that somehow. If you're listing a house, and this is my personal opinion, if you're listing a house and it's in a 1,000 home subdivision, and you know every home in that area has city water and sewer, I think I can, if you're signing to that and attesting that that's a true statement, that's all I need.
Okay.
But obviously if your seller can provide a water bill, a lot of times buyers want to know what utility costs run. So that just helps you down the road to go ahead and add that. I'm never going to reject it because I don't see that water or sewer bill attached to that disclosure. So that's a good question. It is something that you should ask for, but if you don't have it, I'm not going to return your file because of that. I would return it if I don't see a septic permit, because that's a biggie, unless there's no records available. If there's no records available, then again, you have to document that to protect yourself. The next office form, again, applies to North or South Carolina, is our business affiliate disclosure. This is our RESPA form. This one actually, my little jump drive needs to be updated. Our current RESPA form was revised, I believe, in July. So this date on this one is actually June. So my apologies. But make sure that you have your clients sign this. This is not a requirement for them to use these vendors. This is a federal disclosure indicating to the buyers and or sellers that those firms are affiliated with us, and Keller Williams does receive money or compensation from these vendors should you elect to use those. It does not mean that you have to use those vendors. So it's just a disclosure, but it is a federal requirement. So, hey, you definitely have to comply with that. Firms have been sued for failure to disclose relationships with, say, title companies and mortgage companies. So really important. So in your South Carolina transactions, yes, you still need to use the RESPA. All right, let's get into the listing agreement. Any questions out there so far in Zoom?
Terry, I do have one question. So
Okay.
where are all the, I just looked on Facebook, and is that where all the most recent versions of all the forms are stored usually?
No, you may have Facebook links. However, you should get all of your forms from DocuSign. That's where the office updates our office forms, and where you'll find the most recent realtor forms or through DocuSign. And when you click on forms, you have realtor forms, and then you have office forms. So there's a couple of different tabs where those forms are located. And just note again, In the RESPA, you'll see 3 RESPA forms in there, one for a High Country office, one for Huntersville office, and one for the Cornelius office. So just make sure you use the correct forms when you're clicking on those. Open them up and look at them, make sure that they're correct.
All right,
Good
thank
question.
you. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry, is the May 2020, is that the most recent exclusive right to sell listing agreement?
It is, right. The listing agreement was actually revised in May due to the clear cooperation policy with our MLS systems. So everything else would be updated and show a revision date of July of 2020. July is when the Real Estate Commission revises or shows an update on all other forms. But the listing agreement was revised in May, so that one was not changed since May. So that is a current form. And you'll see that at the bottom of the page, of course, you see that revision date on Form 101 for the listing agreement. Okay, so we're not going to read every page of this. The purpose of this class, of course, is just to get you familiar with the forms. Here's a tip of the day, though. It's a boring read, but you do need to read this and maybe highlight some areas to share with your sellers. The more you can share with your sellers of things that they don't know, the better you're going to look in their eyes as a professional, and they're going to think, oh man, you're wonderful. For example, that security system in their house that's leased, they have a contract on that, and it could be a long-term contract, say for a couple of years. Well, if it's leased equipment, that doesn't convey to the new buyer. Okay, so if you point that out, hey, that is leased equipment, unless the buyer happens to want to take over that lease, just know that you're going to be responsible for paying that lease out. They're going to think, wow, you're a rock star for bringing that up. So again, I don't have a whole lot of time for tips and tricks, but PJ will cover a lot of good information in his listing presentation class. But if you read the listing agreement and you highlight some of those areas that are most not commonly talked about during a listing presentation, it protects you and protects the sellers, because hey, if they have to pay off $1,000 lease agreement for the security system, that's less money out of their pocket they have to buy that new house that you're showing them, right? So the listing agreement is, again, really is fill in the blank. You have to have a start date or an effective date, and you have to have an ending date, as you notice under paragraph 1. What is that ending date going to be? Anybody?
6 months out.
Yeah, usually it's about 6 months, but it could be longer or shorter. It's all subject to negotiation, just as the commission is. If it's a very high-end property, I would try to shoot for a year, because if you're marketing a $1 or $2 million property, I've seen several sell within just a few days, just like our $200,000 and $300,000 homes. But I've seen several that take a year to sell. So you want to shoot for a little bit more than 6 months on something like that. If the property is overpriced and you still choose to take the listing or in need of a lot of repairs, again, you may need more than 6 months. So, use your experience or rely on questions to some of your fellow agents and see what they would recommend if it's going to be different than 6 months in your particular situation. Your property description, that is not just your mailing address. There's other information on here. And guys, tell me, where are you going to get information about the property other than from what the seller tells you?
The deed of trust.
The deed of trust, your deed itself is more importantly, your deed of trust is a lending document, but you copy your deed. That is a requirement that you pull a copy of your deed. You're going to look at the county tax records. And RealList is a link from our MLS site. So RealList should be a duplicate of the tax report per se. It's just a little bit different and has additional information than the tax record. So those are your 3 sources. You're going to ask the seller for information. You're going to pull the real list report, and you're going to pull the tax record report, and you're going to pull the deed. And that's how you would get your information to make sure that you have everything that you need for the property information. Pulling your deed tells you who the property is assigned to by name, where in real list or tax records, you may only have a space for 2 people, but there could be more than 2 on a deed. And I ran into that recently. Well, actually last year. I thought it was just 2 people on the deed, and they'd actually put the daughter on the deed and didn't mention that. So when I pulled the deed, it's, oh, by the way, I got to get your daughter to sign these documents as well, because she's on the deed. So that's why that deed is really important. You go into the second page, and that gives you the definition of fixtures. What is a fixture? Short stories, if you turn the house upside down and shake it, if it doesn't fall off, it's a fixture. You've probably heard that, haven't you? Okay, so if it's attached to the house, it's probably a fixture. However, if it's a leased equipment, like, again, security systems, satellite dishes, those are not fixtures. They don't come out and remove satellite dishes from the roof anymore, but, that is not a fixture. That, again, is leased from DirecTV or Dish or whatever, and doesn't necessarily convey. Fuel tanks, if they're buried fuel tanks, that's very important to disclose and note if there's any fuel in there. It's owned by the seller, but the seller does need to leave enough fuel in the fuel tank for utilities to run up through the day of closing. In other words, doing a final walkthrough, if that heat is an old oil-based furnace, it needs to work, which means there has to be a little bit of oil left in that tank. Other than that, they can pump out most of it and sell it back to the vendor. But again, these are discussions to have with your sellers, and make sure that they understand what is theirs and what needs to get replaced. For example, another good one is a mailbox. If they live on a busy highway and somebody has a wreck and takes that mailbox out, a mailbox is noted as a fixture, so it needs to get replaced. They can't just take it down because they have a post office box. That mailbox actually needs to get replaced, and that happens quite a bit. People have accidents and they take out a mailbox. So it needs to be replaced with a similar mailbox before closing. So those are your fixtures. Again, you're going to note on the next page, moving along, if it's anything that's leased or not owned, you're going to note that. You're going to note anything that doesn't convey that is a fixture. Yes, the sellers do have the right to take things that are considered a fixture. If I have a $10,000 crystal chandelier hanging in the dining room, I'm probably going to take that. And trust me, they're out there. I've seen several of them. Those are not going to convey if so indicated. You want to make sure that you disclose that on your listing remarks, that fixture does not convey, but you're going to recommend to your sellers, Mr. and Miss Seller, trust me, if the buyers see it, they're going to want it. So you need to take that chandelier down before we start showings and replace it with a nice fixture for the dining room. Because again, yes, we know that you're going to take it, but do you want to risk a deal falling apart because somebody falls in love with that fixture and doesn't realize they're not buying the fixture, they're buying your house. And then you have a problem. So make sure that you address those little things. And same thing for a kitchen refrigerator. They may have literally just bought a very expensive Viking refrigerator. Hey, we're taking that to our new house. That's great, Mr. and Miss Seller. But when I leave here, you need to get somebody to come over, take that new Viking refrigerator out of your kitchen, put it in the garage, and put a blanket on it, because the buyers are going to ask for it. And that's going to be a deal breaker when they see it. You need to get another less expensive refrigerator to put in the kitchen, because I've really never seen a house that's a resale close without a refrigerator in place. Buyers are going to need a refrigerator. It is personal equipment. Most sellers do leave a refrigerator. So if you don't want to leave yours because you just spent $10,000 on it, take it out before showings and put it in the garage and cover it up so that the buyers don't see it. You're going to look like boy, you are on the top of your game. You're going to look real good in the seller's eyes.
So Lucy, bring back your hump jump.
Home warranty, please, on number 5, there is a company out there, America's Preferred, that will give you $100 if you order home warranty through them. It says agents, we have to disclose that. So please put on number 5 that you will receive or can receive a fee of $100 if they happen to order a home warranty through America's Preferred. The other home warranty companies, to my knowledge, do not give us anything anymore. But since the one does, we have to disclose that, right? I would always recommend the sellers do a home warranty because most of the time the buyers ask for it, and it will cover the seller day one. If something breaks, they just have to pay that little trade fee. So they're going to love you for that. If something does break and they only have to pay a $75 trade fee, and they get a new HVAC system, for example. Your fees, what are we listing that property for under number 7? What's your commission? Anybody?
I do 8%.
8%. Very good. What do you do?
Haven't done one yet.
Okay. What did you do one for?
I was 6%.
6%.
Yeah.
Okay. So the key is we have to make sure that the sellers understand, commissions are not fixed rates. That's price fixing. We're not allowed to do that. Commissions are negotiable. I list a property for 6% in most cases. You can list a property for down to 5% if it's appropriate, and you need to do that. Any less than 5% requires broker in charge approval or approval by your team leader, PJ Kennedy. We are not a discount brokerage. We offer a lot to our buyers and sellers. So we are not going to be a flat fee discount brokerage. We do not want you guys going out there listing for 4%, which would mean you really listing for 1% because you're giving me, a buyer's agent, 3%, right? So you can list for a flat fee, and I've done that before. If it's a real inexpensive home, an investor type property, it's $50,000, $60,000, I'm going to do a flat fee, and it's going to be pretty high up there. It could be as high as 10%, but I don't present it that. I present it as a flat fee. So how you present it is up to you. Just know that you can do a percentage or you can do a flat fee, and it's always negotiable. Your fee is earned under 7 section B3. You have a protection period. Make sure that you put it around 90 to 120 days after the expiration date of the listing agreement. That is your protection period. Without going into a lot of detail, basically, you're notifying your seller if the property was to be withdrawn for some reason and you just don't quite know why. You're going to notify your seller. These are the names of all the people that have seen your house, and should they come to you directly and want to buy your house, they got into your house through my marketing efforts and the agent's efforts on maybe the buying side. So we are still entitled to the commission. So you need to bring us into the loop, and we need to follow through. Even though it's an expired listing, we need to follow through with that contract process because you owe us a fee. So you have to make sure that you somehow address that in your listing presentation. You don't want somebody listing the house for a couple of weeks and then saying, oh, okay, I'm going to take it off the market. We have 30 showings. I'm pretty sure I can sell this myself. Got to set expectations. I am your listing agent. I will be the one negotiating contracts for you and working with you through closing. And you owe me a fee for that. So have that conversation. And how much of that commission are we paying to the buyer's agents only under Section 8? That is on page 4. Under section 8, you're cooperating only with buyer agents. That's the middle section. And you should be offering them 3%. If you take a reduced commission, say of 5%, it is up to you, or you're going to split that with a buyer's agent, which could result in buyer's agents picking and choosing which listings they're going to show first and promote. If you offer them less than their normal 3, you could be doing a disservice to your seller if you don't offer them 3 and you take 2. You follow me? That's your 5%. Or you're going to do 2.5 and 2.5. You're offering them half of what you get, but it's less than their normal 3. So once you explain how commission works to your sellers, I'm just trying to give you enough ammunition so you can keep, if it's 6%, you can keep that commission structure at 6%, because remember, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I only get half of it. I'll offer the other half to the buyer's agents. And if they see less than 3, they're not as motivated to show your property. Okay? And I'm not going to take less than I give to a buyer's agent, right?
So I'm okay though, because I do 8% and I always give the buyer agent 4% and I keep 4%.
Yep.
I can keep doing that. Right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can pay the buyer's agent the 4, and then that just,
It just
boy,
goes
they're
quicker when I
they're
do it.
gonna gonna jump all over that if they see a 4% split, and I've seen some as low as a 2% to the buyer side. I don't like that. Now I'll still show it because as a buyer's agent, we're supposed to take care of our buyers. But boy, I usually don't have too much good to say about that 2% listing, especially when there's 3s out there and even a 4.
I got access to MLS yesterday, went in, clicked on the first property new listing, it was the 2%.
2%, yep.
Next.
As you are around some of the leaders in the office and the senior agents, you'll be able to pick up some tips and tricks to keep your commissions where it should be at least 6% or more, and not automatically reduce your commissions. Because again, if you reduce commissions to the buying agent, it may cause that property a little bit longer to close, and less showings. Yeah, it's just not right. Our buyers work just as hard as we do as sellers agents, so we deserve to get our full share. Absolutely. All right, next page, we're talking about marketing. So when is the commencement of marketing going to take place? The listing agreement is effective the day that the buyer and the listing agreement is effective the day that the seller and the listing agent sign it, right? So if we sign a listing agreement today, it's effective today. But when do we start marketing the property? It could be a couple of weeks from now, couldn't it? Well, see, guys, I still have to do some painting, and I've got carpet people coming in here next week. So I don't want to do any showings for a couple of weeks. So that could be a delayed marketing. And then you would put that delayed marketing date on there for 2 weeks from today. If you do that, though, you can't put a sign in the yard. Delayed marketing is just that. It's delayed, no sign. How do we get around that? Coming soon, exactly. So you see a lot of coming soons. I just did a coming soon listing, and it worked like a charm. You generate that interest for the first week or 2. Once the showing date hits, you have showings scheduled almost every hour on the hour. You have multiple offers on the property by day 2, and everybody is happy. And again, thanks, you are awesome for recommending a coming soon rather than a delayed marketing. So with the coming soon, you can put your sign in the yard today. You can delay showings for up to 21 days, but I would never go more than 2 weeks because then it starts getting old. So put your sign in the yard today, but once you put a sign in the yard with a clear cooperation policy, we do have 1 business day to put it in our MLS system. So, if you take a listing, you need to be prepared to put the data into the MLS and at least 1 picture, right? Because you have to have a picture in order to click submit, and put that into the MLS system as they coming soon. And then you can delay that showing till all the carpet and painting or whatever work it needs to be done. So I always recommend a coming soon. That is a separate addendum. You should see that in the office documents, but if not, it is under MLS documents through Canopy MLS Association. You can pull that coming soon directly from Canopy. And you should, because those do change, and you want to, again, make sure that you have the most current version. Marketing, you do need to get their permission to do put a sign in the yard, do open houses, internet advertising. So you do need to have those discussions with the seller. Some sellers may not want you to do an open house, especially with COVID. That's okay. Some sellers may not want you to do a sign. Is that okay? Somebody in Zoom land answer that one. Can you do a listing without a sign?
You could.
Yeah, absolutely. A sign is not required. You're going to maybe note in remarks that there's no sign in the front yard, but we had a situation recently where somebody called me and said, Terry, they don't want a sign in the yard, but what do I do? Well, okay, well, they don't have to have a sign. Did they tell you why they don't want a sign? Yes, that person was sold a house in a previous state. Somebody broke in thinking it was a vacant house and attacked her. I said, okay, Mr. or Miss Agent, don't you think that's a valid reason not to want to have a sign in the front yard? Well, yeah. Okay, well then we don't require it. You know, you're the agent. It's not a requirement from KW. So in that case, absolutely. Please don't put a sign in the yard. Don't put a directional rider on the corner. Just, you don't need the sign to sell the property. You can do all your marketing and indicate that there's no sign in the front yard, and still, you know, get that property sold. So respect the seller's wishes. Sometimes they want their privacy. The reality is their neighbors are going to know when they're selling, because you're going to have everybody's cars lined up taking people in and out of the house. And a lot of us have something on our car that indicate that we're a real estate agent and who we work for. So sign is not a requirement, nor is a lockbox. But I would caution you, if you ever take a listing without a lockbox, what does that mean? You got to be there to let them in. That's no, we don't work that way. At least I don't work that way.
North Carolina, the association that come forward that were more upscale communities.
It is possible. However, most of the upscale communities here require you to have a community specific sign. For example, in Skybrook, you have to use their approved sign. There's a neighborhood at the peninsula, you're going to have to use their approved signs, you know, things like that. So that's okay. You just hopefully you can use that sign on another listing in the future.
In my neighborhood, they require the sign to be in the window only.
Yeah, that is common. Good point. So if you list a townhome or a condominium, most of those neighborhoods do not allow you to put a sign in the common area in the front yard in front of the buildings. So you have to put one in the window. I'd recommend you put two. You put one in the window in the front, maybe one in the window in the back if it's visible from a roadway, or you just put one upstairs and one downstairs, because they're really hard to see. And that was true in a neighborhood where I had some investment property. And I think I wound up putting 3 signs out there. I wanted everybody to be able to find that property, because if you put it out in the front yard, trust me, in those neighborhoods, you have one day before the HOA is going to be calling you, telling you better take that sign down before they do, and they'll throw it away. So thanks for bringing that up. All right, moving along, just to get through this listing agreement, you have some seller representations, which you need to verify and do your due diligence. Is the property in a flood zone? Does it have synthetic stucco, which is not a good thing? If it's synthetic stucco, there's probably some additional inspections that are going to be done by the buyer to make sure that there's no hidden water damage. Is it in a homeowners association? And if so, what is the contact information for that HOA? So you're going to put that on the listing agreement, and you're going to also verify if there's any proposed or special assessments by contacting the HOA directly. That's a question you're going to ask your sellers, but what if your sellers give you bad information because they don't know, or they threw the letter away that indicated, hey, we've got a $500 special assessment coming up for pool repairs because we we've got some major repairs coming up and we don't have the money to pay for it.
What if there is one and it doesn't have any contact information? Because I ran into that over here on the line of Mooresville and Catawba.
Uh-huh.
It's an old development and it has one, but it doesn't have one.
Yeah, there are some older developments, you're exactly right, that are self-managed.
Yeah.
And there are CCNRs on probably every development that was ever built, whether they're available or not, yeah, it depends. But if it says there's an HOA, there is. If there's no president, there's no contact number, there's no person to call. You can only disclose what you know, but you're going to disclose that you've made every effort to try to identify an HOA contact person, and that it could not be determined who that might be. But you are going to check, yes, that there is an HOA. A lot of the self-managed HOAs, they really take no action or do no action, and that person could pass away and it could be left vacant with no contact person for a long time until something comes up.
Yeah, like
Good
that
question.
neighbor's name.
Termite bond, we should know a termite bond is a good thing where you're having pest inspections on a routine basis. And if termites are discovered, the treatment is taken care of by the termite company at no cost to the seller. They would pay an annual fee for that, and it is transferable to the buyers. So again, that is a good thing. So make sure that you ask that question, along with how long has the property been owned by the seller. That is still on the listing agreement. There are sample forms that we're supposed to give the seller. And please note sample, for example, a sample offer to purchase and a sample of the professional services disclosure. Make sure that you don't give the seller a blank offer to purchase that they could use, right? So you're going to give them something that has got the word sample pre-printed on it, or you're literally going to draw an X on every page and give them maybe a offer to purchase that, again, it's not usable. But why is that important? I mean, it's what, 15 pages long, right? Would it be helpful for you when you're presenting an offer to the sellers for them to kind of know how the offer is structured? So Mr. and Ms. Seller, this is, I want you to actually take some time to read this, because when I present an offer to you, most likely it's going to be by phone, okay, most of the time. And we're going to review every page of it. But if you're familiar with it now, it just helps expedite our discussion about due diligence fees, earnest money amounts, due diligence dates, closing costs paid by seller, home warranties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you actually do that. That is the one exception where you can give out realtor forms. Again, they're a sample form, but you are supposed to give those out when you list a property. Current liens, what does the seller owe on the property? Is there a first mortgage? Is there a second mortgage? Maybe an old second mortgage. Now they're most typically home equity line of credit, or HELOCs is what you see. But again, you have to ask the question. Some sellers do not realize a home equity line of credit has to be closed and paid off at closing. It's not something they can carry with them to the new property. If you owe Fifth Third $50,000 on a home equity line of credit, once that property goes under contract, that home equity line needs to be frozen. The attorney is going to reach out to them, and they're going to have to require that the seller to sign a letter to freeze that account, and require it to actually be paid in full at closing, in addition to the first mortgage. So if you don't ask the questions, you don't know. Also get a copy of that statement. Ask me what I owe on my house. Anybody?
What do you?
Where do you?
I don't know. $250. Yeah. Is that good enough for you to do a seller net? No, You know, I'm going to be pretty close probably. I know about what I owe, but we require you to do a seller net so that the seller knows what they're going to be walking away with on an estimated basis. And if you don't have a copy of that mortgage statement, it is very difficult for you to prepare an accurate seller net. Also, you need to make sure that they are actually walking away with some money in their pocket, or at least breaking even. Otherwise, you may not get paid your what? Commissions. Yes, absolutely. So we'll talk about a seller net here momentarily. If they say, oh, well, I bank online, I don't get a statement, that's okay. You're going to be there for a while taking pictures, making notes about the features of the house and so forth and so on, aren't you? Okay, well, while you're doing that, you ask the seller, would you mind going online and printing out a copy of your statement? That's not an optional. Tell them your broker in charge and your compliance officer requires that in your documentation when you list a house. That is a true statement. We do require it. So blame it on me. That's fine. If they don't give it to you, that's a red flag. Yeah, it means they could owe more than they're telling you. So it could wind up being a short sale. Maybe they're facing foreclosure, or maybe there's just not enough money to pay your commissions. Hey, I'm not going to list a home unless I can prove through the seller net that there's enough money to pay my commissions. So spending a lot of time on that to make sure that you guys kind of bulletproof your listings, so that you don't come up with a surprise at the closing table. Because guess what? Just because I'm a couple of $1,000s short, the attorney is still going to close that property because you have a ready, willing, and able buyer, and you have a ready, willing, and able seller, and those two can pay off their debts other than your commission. It's going to be stamped as closed, and then you'll have to fight for your commission in court. So, all right, be sure to always on the next page, you know, there's again a lot of information here. You're asking them about bankruptcy. Is the seller considering bankruptcy, or are they under bankruptcy protection? One form of bankruptcy protection will allow you to sell the property. In another form requires a judge's approval. So I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to tell you which chapter of bankruptcy allows you to do what, but you're going to consult with an attorney if you face that situation, right? If the property is under lease, remember that tenant has a right to stay there through the end of their lease. So that lease transfers to the new buyer, and then that buyer would continue to receive the rent for the remainder of that lease. Here's where it applies under section J, special assessments. If there's any special assessments, you're going to note that. If not, you're going to put none. You don't put if any seller to pay. That is not correct. They put out that a couple of years ago. If there's a special assessment, you put what it is. If there are no special assessments, you write none, and that's all that you put there. If it's a manufactured home, there's some additional information that you would need to put there, as well as a fuel tank. If there's a fuel tank on the property, you would need to note the description of that. Is it leased? Is it above ground, underground, etc.? And where are you going to find a fuel tank? Yeah, probably out in the counties and surrounding rural areas. I have a propane tank beside of my house for our fireplace and our gas cooktop. So that is a leased piece of equipment. So you need to make note of that on your listing agreement, that it is leased. Now, it could be purchased. I could purchase the propane tank, but not too many people do. If you purchase it, then if it's something, if it was to leak or something, then I got to fix it myself, right? I lease it, it has to be fixed by the servicer. So most people always lease it. If it's a buried tank, that could be a problem. Please make sure that you ask on these older homes. If you have an older home that has an oil tank that is buried, it is probably buried right next to the house, the foundation, you try to dig down 8 feet to remove an underground oil tank, could you create some foundation issues? So you do need to disclose it, and you may have to have a soil test done to make sure that there is no leakage from that underground oil tank. Then you have an environmental hazard. So a lot of questions to ask. There is no such thing as a 1-hour listing appointment. You may have a 1-hour listing presentation, that's different. But if you actually take that listing, you're going to be at that house for a while because there's a lot to discuss and share with the sellers. And then again, you need to be prepared to take pictures if possible, put your sign up, put your lockbox on the property. So if I have a listing appointment and I fully intend to take that listing that day, I'm going to allow about 3 hours. Okay, I'm slow. I'm sorry, because I'm thorough. That's just my nature. I want to make sure I have all my questions answered, so I'm not calling them up 4 or 5 times after I leave. Oh, by the way, your water heater, it was electric or gas? Your HVAC system, what year was that put in? Yeah. Try to get all your questions answered while you're there and make some notes. And it does take a while, but it's time well spent. Then you can turn things over to your transaction coordinator, right? Once we have that transaction coordinator in place, get back to lead generation. Moving along, just some other information you should read on the listing agreement and to make sure that you understand it. Additional terms and conditions. Number 16, remember we cannot draft documents. We're not attorneys, so we can't draft legal documents or language into a contract, but we can write on the listing agreement. What could we possibly write on the listing agreement that may help us? Somebody in Zoom, can you think of anything? Anybody in Zoom? All right, anybody in the class? All right, well, I'll give you an example. I'm taking a listing, but it's just a little bit higher than I think it should be priced at. So Mr. and Miss Seller, I tell you what, let's do this. I think your market value and listing price on your home should be around $300,000 and you're wanting $315,000. Let's try it for 21 days. That's kind of the max that we want to go without doing a price reduction, and see if we can get some bites and get it under contract at close to $315,000. If we don't have it under contract at $315,000, you agree to do price amendment and reduction to $300,000 in 21 days. Does that sound fair? Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. So in a situation like that, under number 16, you're going to put something to the effect, if home is not under contract after 21 days, seller agrees to reduce the price to $300,000. There's a separate form you're going to go ahead and get them to date and sign it's a price change form agreement to agency agreement. We're going to go over here momentarily. So there is a separate form to actually make that change. But if you put it on the listing agreement, it holds them accountable. Okay, so those are things that you could put under number 16, additional terms and conditions.
You could do something as well. I was talking to Rob. And some of the things he would do, like for sale by owner, he would do sometimes like a 30-day guarantee and would let them opt out.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are competing against other listing agents, and you know what your objective is to get them to sign right then, right? So if I know I'm competing, I'm going to do everything I can to try to get that listing, and if that means me offering you something of value to get you to sign, well, Mr. and Miss Seller, I understand that you want to consider your options between the other 2 agents you've spoken to. I think we probably all, if we're professionals and know what we do, we probably all given you the same market value range. I tell you what I will do, if you're prepared to go ahead and list with me, I'll go ahead and pay for that home warranty for you. That's a $550 to $600 value. The buyers are going to ask for it, even if you don't offer it up front. It's most likely buyers are going to ask for that. So that's actual discount that I'll pay for that at closing on your behalf, and we'll consider that a seller paid home warranty in the MLS. We'll offer that to the buyers. If I do that, can we go ahead and move forward? So use your script practicing that you're going to learn from Katrina and in coaching, but that's just a generic way to put something else in here that may help you win that listing. Listing agent will pay for home warranty up to $500 at closing on behalf of the seller. Hey, if they're going to sign with me today, I'll offer that all day long. Okay. So there's a lot of things that you could put in there. Just check with your broker in charge to make sure they're appropriate, but use that to your advantage to try to get them to sign that listing agreement when you're in front of them. Dual agency. What do we know on agency? Here's what we know. We always put your own initials, if you like, under the first section, seller authorized firm to act as a dual agent. And in the last section, seller hereby authorizes firm to designate an individual agent to represent the seller. It should always be dual and designated agency in 100% of the cases on a listing. Why? Somebody asked me why. Okay, well, that's a good question. So if you're listing a very nice home out here in the peninsula for $1 million and your seller does not allow dual and designated agency, then the only default is exclusive. That means you cannot bring them a buyer because you represent them only as a seller as exclusive. It also means I cannot bring them a buyer because you and I work for the same firm, Keller Williams Cornelius. So you're automatically excluding the top producing agents in this area. We're a very productive office. So you never do an exclusive listing. You just have to merely explain to your sellers what dual and designated agency actually means. Dual means that you represent the buyer and the seller. How can you do that and be fair? This is how I do it. Mr. and Miss Seller, and I get to this very early in my listing presentation. Because I have done dual agency sales and I've never had an issue. Other agents feel like it's a conflict and they won't do it. But I do it and I don't feel like there's a conflict, because what I tell my sellers is, Mr. and Miss Seller, we're going to talk about market value of your home and I'm going to recommend a listing price. I do not need to know what is the least that you will take for your home. My job is to get you as much as possible within the fair market price, correct? So the least you'll take, I don't need to know that, because I may be showing your house, most likely I will be showing your house to some of my buyer clients, and if they were to make you an offer on your home, I certainly would never share what you tell me with the buyers, but if I don't know it, I can't tell it. Is it correct? So obviously I can be a dual agent and represent the buyer and the seller, and you're okay with that because you haven't told me the least you'll take for your home. They're going to say yes every time, and then you follow that up. Now, by the way, designated agency is the same thing. It just means it's another agent from our Keller Williams Cornelius office. More than likely, there'll be several showings from another Keller Williams agent out of our Cornelius office. So that would be a designated agent for the buyer side, and I am your seller's agent on the selling side. But if I happen to represent both sides, then yes, I am a dual agent. And I can't share anything confidential that you tell me as a seller, nor would I share anything with you that the buyer tells me that's confidential as a buyer. I can only disclose material facts. So if you go through that presentation with the sellers, you should never have an issue with them always initialing dual and designated agency. Any questions with that? Here's the thing, your buyer agency works the same way. When you have a buyer agency that's signed, do you know what house you're going to be writing an offer on? You don't know who has it listed, right? Because if it's a Keller Williams Cornelius listing, it's the same thing. You're a designated agent. So on your buyer agencies, same scenario, dual and designated. If you do exclusive, what it tells me is you did not do the written buyer agency till after you made the offer on the house. Shame on you. Because otherwise we would never do exclusive, right? Because we're automatically not going to be able to even show a Keller Williams Cornelius listing. Any questions out there? All right, well, good. We're almost through with the listing agreement. There's a mediation clause on there that says they're supposed to go to mediation if there's any disputes between the firm and the seller. If we do our jobs correctly, there should not be. There is a wire fraud warning on here that, and it's on buyer documents as well. Please share with your sellers, you know, there are wire fraud scams out there that I, as an agent, will never, ever, ever send you instructions on where to wire money or proceeds from the sale or purchasing of a property. It's only going to come from the attorney. This is in red and in bold type. So just, it is a discussion that you should take that extra 30 seconds and tell the sellers about to protect yourself and to protect them. I would hate to be an agent where one of my clients had a wire fraud scam. And I did bring that to their attention to make them aware that, hey, be careful when you are told to wire money, that you know who is telling you to do it. And they're only going to tell you one time. They're never going to change it. They're never going to say, oh, by the way, we've changed banks. That's an automatic red flag. They should get in touch with you right away, and you should get in touch with the attorney and find out what's going on, because that's a sign that there's somebody else that's got a hold of some information and they're trying to manipulate where the funds are going, and that's going to kill the sale, and that money will be gone. Questions? All right, so your coming soon form that I referred to that is available through the Canopy MLS Association. It refers to the marketing date. So when are we going to start showing that home? It can be no later than 21 days after the property is being listed. So it's only good for a certain amount of time, and then it has to go to an active status. The property cannot be shown while it's in a coming soon status. Make sure that your sellers understand they're not allowed to let anybody in. You know, if an agent calls you and wants to see a property before the active date hits, it's like, no, absolutely not. Now, if you want to send me an offer on my property sight unseen, absolutely yes, you can do that. Sometimes it can work, and you can write an offer on a house and get a contract signed while a house is still under the coming soon period. But you're not going to be able to see it till that coming soon date arrives. So that's a little bit of a gamble. Seek help from your broker in charge or some senior agents or leadership if you get into a situation and your buyer wants to make an offer on a coming soon property sight unseen. I just did a virtual tour on a property for a client from out of state. It was an active listing, but you can do virtual tours as well and still go under contract, because right now we cannot afford to go a day or longer when a property hits the market. If it's in that $200,000-$300,000 price point and it's very attractively priced and in very good shape, it's going to go very quickly. So if the client can't get in town for a week, go do a virtual tour, bring it up on Skype or FaceTime, show that property, and make sure they see what the neighborhood looks like, what the neighbors across the street and beside them look like. And hey, I just wrote a contract that way, and they're tickled to death. Time is critical in this business. Your seller net sheet, that is a requirement. It needs to be filled out, and in order to have an estimated net proceeds that the seller is going to receive, or if there's a shortage, then it would be a negative sign. And then you identify that with the seller, get them to sign on that form. So there's a space for 3 columns. So what I would normally do if the listing price is $300,000, I would do a sales price of 300, and then I would do the second column for say 290,000. And then I'd leave the third column open for when the property is under contract. I would add that column up according to the contract price. So they're going to see very close to what they're actually going to get at the closing table. In order to do that, here are some numbers that you guys will need. Feel free to write them down in Zoom land on a piece of paper somewhere. And here in the classroom, you can write them on that seller net sheet. Of course, your sales price, we just discussed, whatever it might be. Your mortgage payoffs based upon what the account balance is showing on your statement. Now that is estimated because what is shown on those mortgage statements are not payoffs. They're balances. Interest is paid in arrears, which means it doesn't include last month's interest. You don't know what the closing date is, so it's kind of hard to project what that final payoff will be. But if you just kind of round it up just a little bit, you're going to be really, really close. What you can use for numbers under closing costs for attorney fees for a seller, I would use $300 to $400. Your brokerage fee is 6% or more. Express fees, I would put $50 in there. There's always going to be a charge for the attorney to overnight the payoff to the lender. That's what it means by express fees. It could be $75, so $50 to $75. Most sellers do wind up having to pay for a home warranty, which would be between $500 and $600. That's paid at closing, but it comes out of their seller proceeds, so you should put it on here. Miscellaneous, I would put another $50 under that miscellaneous line. Prorated HOA dues normally are not a factor, but your prorated taxes are. Prorated taxes, you assume when the property may close. Say I listed a property and I assume it's going to close in October, then I owe 10 months of taxes. So I get the annual tax bill, figure what the monthly, divide it by 12 to get a monthly rate, and then do times 10. If you're listing a property in January and you expect it to close in March, then you're going to estimate taxes at 3 months. That money has to be paid at closing. So it's going to be on the closing statement. Now you have to explain to your seller, Mr. and Miss Seller, if you have an escrow account, which most sellers do, that money is at your bank. Your lender has that money. They're going to give it back to you after closing. Once your mortgage has been paid off, 2 to 3 weeks later, you will get a check for your lender for whatever is the balance of your escrow account for taxes and insurance. But at the day of closing, you have to pay that money. It's actually a credit to the buyer, because who is getting the tax bill at the end of the year is the buyer. So you're given the money, in reality, is transferred to the buyer, and the buyer is going to pay the tax bill for the whole year. The attorney will explain that at closing in much more detail. But that's why you put the prorated taxes on here. If you fail to put that down, you could be $2,000 or $3,000 off quite easily on your estimated seller net, and that could be a big deal. Revenue stamps are $1 per 500 or $2 per 1,000. If a property sells for $200,000, it's $2 per 1,000 or $400. So you have to do the math for revenue stamps. That's just another tax. Then make sure you calculate that based upon the sales price. The other items are normally not relevant. So you just kind of draw a line through those. And then you have your estimated seller cost in total. subtract those estimated seller cost from the mortgage, the sales price, and then you have your estimated net proceeds to the seller or from the seller if they happen to be a little short. And you sign it and you get them to sign it. That is a requirement in your file submission. Any questions on that? Okay.
What are the recording fees typically?
Recording fees, oh, okay, I probably missed that. I would put another $75 down for recording fees. There is a cost to record the deed at the courthouse, and that varies per county. So estimate a recording fee down there. So you've got some miscellaneous fees that you could estimate just a little bit high in some cases. But again, if you use some of the information that I gave you, you're going to find that when you compare this with a closing disclosure, if your assumptions were correct, that you're pretty doggone close. So good question. All right. Now, last thing real quick is what if your seller is in the hole $10,000? Could that be an issue? So it could be a short sale, right? It could be pending foreclosure, but you've already asked them that question, about bankruptcy or any pending foreclosures. But what if they're having a job transfer? They just bought that house a year and a half ago. They're being transferred. They work for a major corporation, or maybe they're an attorney or a doctor or whatever, and they're relocating out of state. It's like, yeah, I know. I just bought the house. I knew, after I pay all my fees, I know I'm in the hole. This is what I would do is, again, you can blame it on compliance and your broker in charge if you like. Well, in that case, Mr. and Ms. Seller, all we need is something similar to what you would do if you're buying a home. We just need proof of funds. In other words, you could just have an institution, your bank or an investment firm, just provide us a letter indicating that you have access to $10,000 on demand. And that will satisfy our office requirements. Because again, guys, remember, if they're short and the only difference that they're short about is your commission, that property will still close and you won't get paid. So if I'm the listing agent and they're telling me that, now I know I'm $10,000 in the hole, but that's no problem, I have it to bring to closing. It's just like if it's a buyer, I'm going to want them to prove it to me by a pre-approval letter if you're a buyer, or a proof of funds letter from a seller. That's how I would do it. Some agents may do it differently or may ignore it, but they ignore it at their own risk if they don't get something from the seller indicating that they do have access to bring funds to closing. In the cases that I just described, that should not be an issue. Now, they could even give you a bank statement. And if they say, well, I can give you a copy of my bank statement, just again, you're looking after their best interest. Oh, okay, that's great, Mr. Miss Seller. That will be fine. Just make sure you take a magic marker, you blank out your account numbers, because I don't want access to your personal account information. I just need to show that there's numbers there to my leadership group in compliance that you do have the ability to sell your property. Make sense? Everybody like that suggestion? All right. Next form, real simple form, that's your mineral oil and gas rights disclosure. Most of the time, here are the answers that your seller is going to give you. Under number 1, it should be no representation. They really don't have any evidence or proof if mineral rights were ever severed from the property by a previous owner. It would show on their deed if they were severed, but we never read our deeds. I did not read my deed when I built my last home. I know it's a good deed because the attorney did a title search, but no representation is okay for number 1 and number 4 when it mentions oil and gas rights. Otherwise, do they intend to sever or have they severed the mineral oil or gas rights from the property in a residential acreage or lot or home, the answers are going to be no. And unless they have a couple of thousand acres up in the mountains, and in that case, maybe they do retain mineral rights because they can dig for gold or something, then that's different. But in residential use here in this area, I've never seen anybody that has retained mineral or oil or gas rights.
How does that work with Gore property?
I'm sorry,
Gore property?
you're over my head already.
Yep, me too. I just happened to see it on the listing we looked at the other day. It had it listed as Gore property.
I honestly, I've never heard that term, so I'm not sure what you're asking, but
I didn't know
you can
if
show
that's
me
the only
later.
one. I will.
I'd love to see it. The reason this came to fruition is because a major home builder that was based in Texas, they retain mineral rights on all their neighborhoods that they built in North Carolina, because they did that in Texas, and the Attorney General said, no, you don't. This isn't Texas. You can't do that. You got to give them back. And by the way, now we have a new form that we have to fill out when we list the property to make sure that we don't have anybody doing that again. So it's signed by the sellers, and initials, don't let your sellers get ahead of you. Those initials on the left, it says buyer initials. I've had a lot of sellers start trying to initial those. They're answering the questions on the right, but the buyer is initialing their answers on the left. So they're only signing at the bottom. Oh, guess what? This form, as well as the last form, what do you see there at the top left-hand corner?
Seal.
A state seal. These are not realtor forms. These are created by the North Carolina State Legislature. So guess what? You can give these out to potential clients, like for sale by owners. Go knocking on their door at a for sale by owner and introduce yourself. By the way, Mr. and Miss for sale by owner, I'm here with Keller Williams. Just wanted to see if you had the forms already for your mineral oil and gas rights and your property disclosure. As you know, these are required to be filled out in all cases by homeowners because it's under a general statute. And so if you didn't have them, I wanted to give those to you. And again, you just continue that conversation, trying to get some information to enable you to either show that home to a potential buyer as a for sale by owner and do a for sale by owner fee arrangement agreement, or maybe get in there and do a listing presentation. If they've been unsuccessful, then you can do a listing presentation. If your Keller Offers certified, you can even bring them a Keller offer, which is a really good feature to enable you to get into that home. Because if they don't take the Keller offer, then they're probably ready to go ahead and list with you, right? So this form is a really good thing to have in your tool belt. I would honestly keep copies of this in your car, because when you ride by for sale by owner, when's the best time to stop and go knock on the door? When you ride by, right? Yes. Now, some agents, obviously in lead generation, you call. I do much better in person. I'll be honest with you. I don't call for sale by owners anymore. I used to, but I found I'm much more effective. I actually go knock on their door, which means it takes a little bit more time. I have to see them or know where they are. So I don't make as many contacts, but they're much more productive for me by actually knocking on the door and engaging in a conversation with that for sale by owner. And that has resulted in me selling the house to a buyer client. It has also resulted in me listing the house. So you can choose your own method of lead generation and what you want to focus on. Just know that for some of us, in person is a lot better than trying to talk on the phone. And when you give them something of value like this that they may or may not have or know about, that's a good thing. Yeah. So this is a property disclosure. It's for residential property. It does not apply to vacant land, nor does it apply to condos, nor does it apply to new construction. So if you read the top of that form, it'll tell you what it does apply to. There are a lot of questions on here. I would recommend, and it has to be done by the Sellers, yes. So agents that do everything on DocuSign, whoever you might be out there, this is not correct unless you give the edit abilities to the sellers. So they can edit in their own check boxes. It takes a long time to do this form through DocuSign. I do it in person. I mean, if you're listing the home, you're going to be out there in person, period, put up the sign, to take pictures, to put a lockbox on the door. This is a form you do in person. And you usually ask the spouses which one of you want to fill this out. And I actually look over their shoulder and I just stand there while they go through every line. Because you don't want them to check yes and then check no and then check no representation. And you pull out a blank copy and you have to get them to start all over again. It needs to be nice and clean. And it does take a little bit of time to do that. So if there's an HOA involved, this is where you put the specific HOA information, and then you would answer the questions on page 4. If there's no HOA, then all the questions on page 4 do not apply. So you can just draw a big X on that paper and have them initial and date it, right? Make sure the owners initial and date every page, pages 2, 3, and 4, and they sign on page 1.
Terry,
Yes, question.
don't we have a vendor that helps our sellers fill out that form? I'm having a brain freeze what it's called right now, but we all have access to that?
Yes, we do. You're exactly correct. And I'm having the same brain freeze. I can't identify the name of the vendor that will help with that. That is a very good avenue to use. However, if I'm actually with the sellers doing a listing appointment and that's the only thing left to do, personally, I want to get it done then. Because if I'm listing the house tomorrow, I need to have that form filled out tonight. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Not saying don't use that vendor. Using that vendor is a good avenue. It takes some liability away from everybody. But if you're listing a property that's going to go active immediately, you got to have that form immediately, because what happens in this market, we list a home today and it's sold tonight. And you got to have this residential property disclosure filled out now. That is a good question, and thank you for that.
I'm trying to find the name of it, and I'm just not having.
It might be Seller Shield, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yep, very good. Thank you for sharing that, and that is a good point. So if you're doing a pre-listing appointment, then that is certainly good information that you can maybe get started with that and share the Seller Shield information with the seller so that they know what that is. But if you're actually taking the listing, at the time I'm taking it, I'm going to be the one instructing the sellers or asking the sellers, go ahead and let's get this filled out tonight, because I will probably have your property sold tomorrow. That's just me. Okay. Now, hey, guess what, guys? If it's not a residential property, if it is a condominium resale, if it's vacant land, then the other form doesn't apply, and this form is much simpler. It's much quicker to fill out. That's when there is a owners association in place. So you have a vacant piece of property that is governed by an HOA. You just have to fill out this form. It's very quick to fill out, and just remember that. And again, for condominiums, if you're listing a condominium, this is the form you use. You do not use the residential property disclosure. And I do see that form used on condominiums all the time. It's not my job to educate the listing agent that they used the wrong form, but we need to know which ones are the right ones to use. All right, does everybody know what this form is? Agency agreement renewal and or amendment. I love this form. Why do I love this form? Because we can do almost everything with it after we write a listing agreement or after we have a buyer agency agreement. We can make changes to those agreements on this one piece of paper. We don't have to go back to the original listing agreement or the original buyer agency agreement to make changes. we're going to change the price of the home. We're going to reduce it from 200 to 185,000. Merely, it's right on here. Price shall be changed. You make a note what the original price is and what it's changed to. You can renew a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement if it was dated for 6 months ago and it's getting ready to expire. You renew it for another 6 months or whatever predetermined period applies, and you just put it on this form. There is a space for other amendments. What other amendments could we make to a listing agreement, for example?
Days.
Um,
Like if they decide not to take a ride a lawnmower or a tractor.
Well, you could. I was thinking more such as maybe they didn't want to do the home warranty initially, and now that they decided, yeah, they've gotten a couple of offers. They were too low, but yeah, everybody was asking for the home warranty, so they finally take your advice and yeah, let's go ahead and order that home warranty. So you can do other amendments. Seller now agrees to have a home warranty ordered for a cost of up to $600, which will be paid for at closing by seller proceeds. So other amendments that we don't see these too often in the seller's market that we have, but in days when it was a buyer's market and properties were a little bit more difficult to sell, you offer agent bonuses. So you can offer an agent bonus even today. The seller agrees to offer an agent bonus of $2,000 at closing. That's simple, to the buyer's agent. So and then you could put that in the MLS remarks. You have a $2,000 agent bonus upon closing on this property. Hey, that could help some of your stagnant properties that aren't selling for some reason. That could generate additional interest and get that buyer's agent a little bit more motivated to try to reach out to maybe some of their investor clients and start pushing that property their way. Hey, this could be a good investment. We really need to go check it out. Guess what, guys? Agent bonus money is yours. You get to keep it, right? The only thing that we deduct from agent bonus money, if it's disclosed in that manner as agent bonus, is that initial 6%, the royalty fee that goes to Keller Williams in Texas. That 6% is what comes out. We don't take a split out of your bonus as a company, as an office, that extra, that 20% split, nope, you keep that. So if you ever see a bonus, I've had a couple of properties where I've got bonuses on. Those are sweet because basically it's all your money. We like those. So guys, remember this form. I get this question all the time. I need to make a change to a listing agreement or buyer agency. How do I do that? This is how you do that. I would keep a copy of one of these available because again, you can do a lot with this form instead of having to go back and revise an existing listing or buyer agency. It is not a contract amendment though. That is a totally different form. So please don't confuse that with a contract amendment on an existing offer to purchase that has became a contract. Now we've got a little bit of time left and we're almost through here. Does every property close that you have under contract? So sometimes they have to be terminated, which is true. And actually the next form, all right, let's say that we haven't got the money yet. The due diligence fee or the earnest money hasn't been received by the escrow agent and it's been 5 days. Do we have a contract? Yeah, we still have a valid contract, a valid binding contract. But here's what we would do as a listing agent. We would give a notice to buyer to deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer within one banking day, one banking or business day. They have to have that money in the proper hands, be it the seller with the due diligence fee, or the escrow agent and attorney with that earnest money. And after that one banking day, once they've received this notice from the listing agent and signed by the seller, then the seller has the right to terminate that contract. So yes, you have a contract, even though they haven't got the money. You give them a notice, demand notice. If you still don't have the money within that one banking day, then the seller is allowed to terminate the existing contract for breach. Then you can put it back on the market as an active status and get it back under contract with someone else. So this is the only way to issue a demand for the money to be given immediately within one banking day. So sometimes you may have to use that. But remember, if you use it, then the time, its time is of the essence. There is no, past the one banking day, your seller is going to terminate. Sometimes things do get lost in the mail. That's why I always suggest if something is being mailed as overnight, certified mail, something like that, so that it does come within the 1 or 2 days, and you don't go to day 5. That's a newer form. It's only been out 2 or 3 years. Thought I passed a form here. Let me just back up for a minute. Nope. Okay, so next up, our due diligence request and agreement. I like to call this the repair request. So within the due diligence period, you have your inspections done. The buyer is going to make a request for certain things to be done by the seller before closing. And this, again, sometimes is as difficult to negotiate as it is to get the property under contract at a certain price. So it's a negotiation. Properties are sold in North Carolina as is, according to the offer to purchase, correct? So seller does not have to make any repairs. Usually they will, and it's a negotiation. I just went through a very strenuous negotiation for a buyer client on a property that literally caused my blood pressure to go up. It was just so difficult to communicate with this other agent over stuff where the buyer was being very, very reasonable. But we finally got it done. We got it done Saturday at 5 o'clock, a couple of days ahead of the end of the due diligence day. So use this form, put your repair request on the proper form, refer to the inspection report, refer to the item number, be very clear what your buyer is asking for. And if you're on the selling side, please make sure that your seller is very clear, again, what exactly is the repair that the buyer is asking them to do. And if everybody agrees, then you sign this form. If nobody agrees, there's not a form to turn in, right? So this is a required form that you're probably going to send out or receive as a seller or a buyer's agent, but there's no requirement for any buyer or seller to ever come to an agreement. So if this form is not in your file, guys, that's okay. It just means that there wasn't a repair request made, or the buyer and the seller never came to an agreement, but they still closed on the property. More than likely, if it's a significant request and the seller doesn't agree to something, the buyer, of course, has the ability to walk away under due diligence. And then you run into the termination forms that we're getting ready to go over. But this is your due diligence agreement, or repair request, as I like to call it. And it does need to be completed and signed, and everybody needs to be in full agreement before the end of due diligence, which occurs at what time on any given day?
No.
5 p.m. 5 p.m. where? 5 p.m. here. That's another key, another tip of the day. You can have agents representing a seller here. You can have an agent representing a buyer in California. It's Eastern Standard Time. The time 5 p.m. in North Carolina. It does not matter what time it is in California. So if you don't have your due diligence request or your termination forms filled out prior to 5 p.m. on the due diligence date, your earnest money is at risk. And yeah, so enough said. That is time of the essence and it is a 5 p.m. date as opposed to end of business day or midnight. So termination of agency is the next form, and that is not termination of contract. This is termination of a buyer agency or a listing agreement. Yes, you can terminate a buyer agency, but this is most commonly used with a termination of a listing. Hey, the seller just lost their job, so now they can't move and buy that new home they were hoping to buy. So, yeah, that's a legitimate reason to terminate and withdraw a listing, right? So, sometimes this happens. You do need to actually terminate the listing by filling out this form. Okay. Get them to sign it. You do have the right under number 5 to ask for reimbursement of any of your expenses. Sometimes we do. Most of the time we don't as agents. But you could, if you just spent $1,000 in marketing and 3 weeks later they terminate for practically really no reason, I would ask, just, they may not pay it, but I would ask for it. I'd ask them to pay me something, see what happens. There's really not much you can do if they don't agree to pay you something to recover some of your marketing expenses. But you can put that on there. But the key is number 4. Number 4, it says protection period preserved. That puts them on notice that, again, they are still liable to pay you a commission within that 90 to 120 day period that you put on the listing agreement. If you provide the names of any of the buyers or probable buyers that looked at that house during the time you had it listed. So you're going to have the names of your buyers, or you're going to have the names of my buyers. But you're going to call me, right? And you're going to say, Terry, I'm taking this listing off the market. I'm not quite sure why, to be honest with you, but I want to make sure that I'm protected and you're protected. Should your buyer want to reach out directly to the seller and make an offer. So would you be kind enough to provide me the first and last names of the buyers that saw this property? And I'm going to give you a list of every one of them because I want to protect my commission. So you do have to provide that list of names to your sellers in order for that protection period to be preserved. Okay. Now, we're not going to talk too much more about that. It may result in litigation, which is never a win-win for anybody. But if the sellers know that they're on notice, hey, here's a list of 24 people that have seen their house, more than likely they're going to, hey, yeah, John Smith just called me. Now he wants to buy the property, so come write it up. Okay, that way you still get paid. Seller knows that they're bound and liable. So this is how you would terminate a listing. Now the listing belongs to who? It's your listing, but it actually belongs to the firm, belongs to Keller Williams. So your broker in charge, Rob Pettit, is the representative of our firm. He is the one that actually has to withdraw that listing for you. So when you have a listing, it has to be withdrawn. You're going to turn this paperwork into Command for compliance so I can see it. And then you're going to send Rob Pettit, your broker in charge, an email with a copy of this form. Hey, Rob, would you please withdraw 123 Main Street? Sellers lost their job. They couldn't get that new house they were hoping to get, so we had to take this home off the market. So he actually has to take it out of the MLS for you. Now, you can change it to temporarily off the market, which you should do that. Gets it off the market so the phone's not ringing off the hook for people to want to schedule a showing. But as far as actually withdrawing it from MLS, that still needs to be done, and Rob Pettit would have to do that for you.
Terry, is that just for PBs or all brokers?
That is for all brokers. Even myself, I am under the direction of Rob Pettit, is my broker in charge. So he would actually have to withdraw a listing for me. He could give me that ability, but fortunately he is not, and I haven't asked for it because it just puts more work on me. Don't tell him I said that, though. But yes, your representative for your firm has to be the one to withdraw the listing for any broker, and normally that is just the broker in charge. Good question. All right, unrepresented seller disclosure and fee arrangement. This is your for sale by owner form. And have any of us had the opportunity to knock on a for sale by owner yet? Well, when we do, this is all that we need to fill out if they agree to co-broke with us. And trust me, all the for sale by owners out there, for the most part, are more than ready and willing to co-broke with you. If you bring them a buyer, they're going to be willing to pay you a commission, because that's who they're going to be. The buyers are going to have an agent, right? So if I'm a buyer, I'm not going to go to a for sale by owner and give them $5,000 earnest money. I'm going to make sure I have an agent, and I'm going to have my agent tell me who to send it to attorney-wise to be held in escrow. I'm not giving it to the for sale by owner. So the for sale by owners know that. So again, if you have somebody that you can identify by name that wants to see that property, you have this form filled out first. That's all you need. Whoops, did I say that's all you need? Somebody read the top of page 2. Really important. Somebody in Zoom. What does the top of page 2 on form 150 say? All right, in the classroom.
Do not sign this form until you have received and read the working with real estate agents brochure.
Absolutely, thank you. That is so important, guys. When you're talking with that for sale by owner, there are actually 2 forms that they need to sign. You need to have them sign the working real estate brochure first. If they're agreeing to cooperate with you and co-broke with you and let you show that home to a buyer client, they need to sign it, not just give it to them. That's not good enough. We require, the Keller Williams requirement is it needs to be signed. And we had an agent try to say this seller would not sign that working with real estate, but they would sign the for sale by owner agreement. I'm sorry, I call BS. I'm saying that agent was just didn't do it. So it requires that you have that working real estate brochure signed, then have them sign form 150 as unrepresented seller disclosure, identify the commission that you're going to get paid if your buyer, John Doe, makes an offer on that property and it's accepted and at closing, then the seller owes you the commission. Pretty clear. That happens quite often. We do wind up in cross sales with a for sale by owner, and we all know that we do not represent that for sale by owner, so we cannot give them any advice whatsoever. Yes, we do have to give them the forms to sign. We have to make sure if they don't have a property disclosure, yes, that's a state form. You give them the property disclosure. You don't help them fill it out. You give them the MOG disclosure. You don't help them fill it out. But you do give them the paperwork. You ask for their signature. If they have any questions, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I suggest you consult with a real estate attorney. You really can't answer their questions or give them directions. They're really not that difficult. Get everything signed, and then you should have a successful closing. That is your for sale by owner, and that is form 150. I get that question a lot. What form do I need? It's form 150 and the working with real estate's disclosure. Believe it or not, a lot of agents miss that. I've had seasoned agents that have been in the business for over 20 years. Here, I never knew that until I heard you say that in one of your classes, or until you returned my file because I didn't have it. I won't say who that was. Okay, almost done here, guys. We got 8 minutes left. I appreciate your patience. Hope this has been helpful to you. We've got some termination forms, and then we're kind of wrapped up here. So this is a form where the seller is being notified by the buyer that the buyer is terminating the offer to purchase. Usually you see this form where number 2, the second box, it exercises exercise by buyer of right to terminate during the due diligence period. In other words, the buyer is going to terminate the contract because they have a right to do so within the due diligence period. That is most commonly what you see when a buyer walks away and terminates the offer to purchase. Please make sure you have that discussion with your sellers, that sometimes that can happen. Buyers can change their mind for any or no reason during that due diligence period. But Mr. and Ms. Seller, if that is the case, you have to sign the release of earnest money. The earnest money cannot be released unless the sellers sign it. So I'm going to tell my sellers, you don't have a choice. You need to sign the release of earnest money if a buyer walks away. Don't take it personal. In other words, you have to set expectations. A seller may say, well, I'm not going to sign it for a few days. That's not right. You can't force them to sign it. You're not attorneys. You're not judges and juries. But you set the expectation, Mr. and Ms. Seller. If a buyer was to terminate within due diligence period, once you receive that termination form, you're expected to sign it immediately. Okay? So make sure you communicate that. Because we can't, the money cannot be released unless it is signed by the seller. Now here's another termination form. It's by mutual agreement. That's where the buyer and the seller, something has happened and the buyer and the seller both mutually agree that the common contract needs to be terminated. Maybe there was an inability from the seller to give a good marketable title. Maybe they had a $200,000 tax lien they didn't disclose. You didn't know about it. They said that they didn't know about it, which is probably not true. But if they can't sell the property unless they pay off that tax lien, then they're in breach. And so you have to terminate the contract, right? So this is by mutual agreement. It could be, again, past the due diligence period, but literally one of the buyers died, and something happened. They got hit by a truck. They just passed away. If one of the buyers died, what's the right thing to do, Mr. and Ms. Seller, is allow the buyers to terminate the contract. And it does have on here what is to be done with the deposits, the escrow money. That's to be determined and has to be written on this form. The right thing to do would be, of course, to give it back to the buyers in full. Sometimes sellers may say, well, I've had my home off the market for a while, so I'll split it with the buyers, or I want it all. You know, that is a negotiation. If the contract is terminated after the due diligence period, the buyer and the seller have to decide what is the right thing to do. And as an agent, again, you can't give legal advice. You just have to write down what the sellers agreed to, and whether that's refunding the money in full, whether the seller keeps it, or whether they split it 50-50. Just put that on the form so that the escrow agent, which is the attorney, knows what to do with that money, and of course, where to send it. So that means you do need current addresses for both buyers and sellers. So that's a termination by mutual agreement. So the previous form was a termination by the buyer. There is a form where the seller can terminate the purchase agreement. I didn't put that on here. So just know that when you're looking for termination forms, you're going to find a lot in the list of realtor forms. Make sure that you read the form just so that you're using the right one, because it is confusing. There's a lot of real estate forms out there. You can always turn to the staff here for help. We're certainly willing to help you. Make sure that you have the right forms when you turn things into compliance. We had a question earlier. Go ahead and turn them in. If you've got the documents and everything is there, you're maybe not sure about one document, go ahead and just turn in what you've got. I mean, that's the way the system works. If there's a document that's missing or that's wrong, I can note that, okay, this is the wrong form, it's a commercial form, or this document is missing, but you can still turn in what you have and meet that 3-day requirement from the Real Estate Commission, because that is a requirement, and even if your file is incomplete, you have to turn in what you have. The other obvious thing that you're probably not going to have in 3 days is the earnest money receipt or due diligence receipt, if it's something that has to be put in the mail. Again, you turn in what you have, that additional page 15 receipt, you turn in when you get it. And again, it could be 5 or 6 days later. So guys, that is the class. I appreciate your participation. And any questions out there? We still got a couple of people out there in Zoom. We've got a couple of people in the classroom. I'll be glad to answer any questions about anything except the Panthers. I don't know what I'll do to help them. All right. All right. Well, everybody have a good afternoon. Thanks again for your participation, and we are done.
Thank you, Terry.
You're very welcome.